Do you believe that an individual's right to bear arms is a constitutional right, that it's not linked to service in a militia?
I think that for most of our history, there was a nuanced reading of the Second Amendment until the decision by the late Justice Scalia. And there was no argument until then that localities and states and the federal government had a right, as we do with every amendment, to impose reasonable regulations.
Do you believe that their conclusion that an individual's right to bear arms is a constitutional right?
If it is a constitutional right, then it, like every other constitutional right, is subject to reasonable regulations. And what people have done with that decision is to take it as far as they possibly can and reject what has been our history from the very beginning of the Republic, where some of the earliest laws that were passed were about firearms. So I think it's important to recognize that reasonable people can say, as I do, responsible gun owners have a right. I have no objection to that. But the rest of the American public has a right to require certain kinds of regulatory, responsible actions to protect everyone else.
If you look at Paris, 130 people killed, hundreds of people still in the hospital, just horribly wounded, can never be the same. And these guys came in, boom, boom, you over here, boom, and they just stood there and just shot everybody. No guns on the other side, folks. If you would have had guns on the other side, if I took a couple of these folks in here, some especially wearing the red caps, Make America Great Again, I promise there wouldn't have been 130 people killed and hundreds of people lying in the hospital to this day. It might not have happened, because if they knew there were guns in the room, it might not have happened. But if it did, you would have had bullets going in the opposite direction, and believe me, the carnage would not have been the same by any stretch of the imagination. Hillary Clinton wants to abolish the Second Amendment. Just remember that. We're not talking about change it. She wants to abolish the Second Amendment. So we're not going to let that happen. I can tell you that right now. We're going to preserve it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to take care of it. Okay?
Being able to plan their families not only saved women's lives, it also transformed them, because it meant that women were able to get educations, build careers, enter new fields, and rise as far as their talent and hard work would take them. All the opportunities that follow when women are able to stay healthy and choose whether and when to become mothers. Everything I have seen has convinced me that life is freer, fairer, healthier, safer, and far more humane when women are empowered to make their own reproductive health decisions.
Now let's move to Planned Parenthood. Democrats will say the money they give to Planned Parenthood does not go to abortions, that the money they give to Planned Parenthood only goes to other women's health issues, including mammograms and things like that. If you knew the government money were only going to that, would you support funding Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, if it didn't have to do with abortions, look, I understand it. I have many, many friends who are women who understand Planned Parenthood better than you or I will ever understand it. I'm not going to fund it if it's doing the abortion. I am not going to fund it. Now, they say it's 3% and it's 4%. Some people say it's 60%. I don't believe it's 60%, by the way, but I think it's probably a much lower number. But I would defund as long as they're doing abortions.
I voted for Obama, but then my health insurance skyrocketed from $490 a month to $1,081 a month for a family of 4. I know Obama told us that we'd be paying a little more, but over doubling my health insurance cost has not been a little more. I would like to vote Democratic, but it's cost me a lot of money, and I'm just wondering if Democrats really realize how difficult it's been on working class Americans to finance Obamacare.
I want very much to get the costs down, and that is going to be my mission, because I do think that for many, many people, but there are exceptions like what you're telling me, having the Affordable Care Act has reduced costs, has created a real guarantee of insurance, because if you'd had a pre-existing condition under the old system, you wouldn't have gotten affordable insurance.
Look, I want, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. Obamacare is a total and complete disaster.
I would repeal Obamacare instantaneously and replace it with something much better, privately done. We get rid of the lines, the artificial lines around each state, so that insurance companies can compete with each other. The insurance companies have made a fortune on Obamacare. I would get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something much better. Obamacare, by the way, just so you know, is a huge generator of tremendous loss for this country. Not only is it terrible where, I don't know if you've seen over the last couple of weeks, people are leaving Obamacare. You have 40%, 50%, 55% increases in premiums. People are leaving Obamacare. It's a disaster. And people have just given up, so much so that they don't talk about it that much. But Obamacare really kicks in 16. You talk about deficits. Obamacare, actually, from a country standpoint, has to be gotten rid of. And you know what? It's no good for the people that have it either.
Where it was necessary, we did support some fencing. Where it was necessary, we did add Border Patrol agents. We have done what by any fair estimate would have to conclude is a good job, quote, securing the border. So let's get about the business of comprehensive immigration reform.
We don't have a country if we don't have borders. We will build a wall. It will be a great wall. It will do what it's supposed to do. Keep illegal immigrants out. Now, with that said, we're going to have a beautiful big door right in the middle of that wall. And people are going to come into our country, and they're going to come in legally. And we want people to come in, and we want to treat people fairly. But we either have a country or we don't. We need a border. We need a wall. We have to stop the inflow of illegals coming into our country. It has to be stopped. It has to be stopped now.
Last week, an undocumented immigrant who had been deported 5 times killed a 32-year-old woman, Kate Steinle, in San Francisco, a sanctuary city where local law enforcement does not enforce federal immigration laws. When you last ran for president, you supported sanctuary cities. In light of this terrible incident, does that change anything about your view on this?
Why do they have sanctuary cities? In large measure because if local law enforcement begins to act like immigration enforcement officers, you will have people not reporting crimes, you will have people hiding from the police, and I think that is a real direct threat to the personal safety and security of all the citizens.
But you would allow the sanctuary cities to disobey the federal law?
Well, I don't think there is any choice. I think the city made a mistake not to deport someone that the federal government strongly felt should be deported. So I have absolutely no support for a city that ignores the strong evidence that should be acted on.
We have to get rid of these sanctuary cities. It's disgraceful. Because I've had so many friends that I've made. First of all, you know, Kate, magnificent Kate, shot in the back and killed in San Francisco, sanctuary city. It's become a very important issue for me, the whole thing with illegal immigration and crime. It's far worse than anybody in this room understands. Far worse. Far worse.
How do you respond to voters who feel betrayed by the way that NAFTA has worked out? You know, our country didn't get the jobs that were promised by President Clinton when that was signed. American jobs just got shipped overseas. That hollowed out a big part of our economy that provided good middle-class jobs. I mean, are working-class people right to feel betrayed by how that worked out?
Well, look, I have said repeatedly that I would like to renegotiate it. I think there were parts of it that did not work as hoped for. But I think you've got to take a broader perspective. Were some jobs lost? Of course. And was it painful and terrible that people lost their jobs and they saw factories that maybe their grandparents even had worked in pick up and move? Yes. And that's why I've come forward with some, very strict proposals that if you're trying to move jobs out of America, if you've ever gotten 1 penny of government aid, and lots of places have, you're going to have to pay it all back. And if you are trying to move your headquarters overseas in this, thing called an inversion that I call a perversion, we're going to slap a big exit tax on you. So I think we do have to, really bear down on companies that are picking up and moving and try to do everything we can to stop them. But I think it's fair to say, Rachel, that more manufacturing jobs were actually created in the 90s. More were created under President Obama. We lost a lot of jobs, particularly manufacturing jobs, when George W. Bush was president.
We allowed foreign countries to subsidize their goods, devalue their currencies, violate their agreements, and cheat in every way imaginable. And our politicians did nothing about it. Trillions of our dollars and millions of our jobs flowed overseas as a result. I have visited cities and towns across this country where a third or even half of manufacturing jobs have been wiped out in the last 20 years. Today we import nearly 800 billion more in goods than we export. Can't continue to do that. This is not some natural disaster. It's a political and politician-made disaster. Very simple. When subsidized foreign steel is dumped into our markets, threatening our factories, the politicians have proven, folks, they do nothing. For years, they watched on the sidelines as our jobs vanished and our communities were plunged into depression-level unemployment. Many of these areas have still never recovered. As Bernie Sanders said, Hillary Clinton voted for virtually every trade agreement that has cost the workers of this country millions of jobs. Our original Constitution did not even have an income tax. Instead, it had tariffs emphasizing taxation of foreign, not domestic, production. Yet today, 240 years after the revolution, we've turned things completely upside down. We tax and regulate and restrict our companies to death, and then we allow foreign countries that cheat to export their goods to us tax-free. There is no way to fix TPP. We need bilateral trade deals. We do not need to enter into another massive international agreement that ties us up and binds us down. Trade reform and the negotiation of great trade deals is the quickest way to bring our jobs back to our country.
Look, we're facing the worst refugee crisis since the end of World War II, and I think the United States has to do more, and I would like to see us move from what is a good start with 10,000 to 65,000 and begin immediately to put into place the mechanisms for vetting the people that we would take in, looking to really emphasize some of those who are most vulnerable, a lot of the persecuted religious minorities, including Christians, and some who have been brutalized, like the Yazidi women.
We now know that our State Department and our president is thinking of bringing in refugees from Syria and Iraq that have been displaced, that are going through Europe. I'm sure many of them are very good people, but do you think some radicals might be mixed in with them? Is that a fear that we should take seriously?
It could very well be, and frankly, you have ISIS, and if you look at a lot of the people that I've been watching on television, it's men. There aren't that many women, relatively speaking. It's a horrible thing in terms of humanity and everything, but Look, from a humanitarian standpoint, I'd love to help, but we have our own problems. We have so many problems that we have to solve. You have over there the Gulf states, tremendously wealthy. They're not taking anybody. Nobody's taking. We're supposed to take. We have to straighten out our own problems.
We should be doing more to ease this humanitarian crisis, not less. And we can get this right. America's open, free, tolerant society is described by some as a vulnerability in the struggle against terrorism, but I actually believe it's one of our strengths. It reduces the appeal of radicalism and enhances the richness and resilience of our communities. Discriminating against Muslims, slamming the door on every Syrian refugee, that is just not who we are. We are better than that.
We have no idea who's coming into our country. We have no idea if they love us or if they hate us. We have no idea if they want to bomb us. We have no idea what's going on. According to Pew Research, among others, there is a great hatred toward Americans by large segments of the Muslim population. By the way, I have friends that are Muslims, they're great people. But they know we have a problem. They know we have a real problem. Because something's going on. And we can't put up with it, folks. We can't put up with it. 25% of those polled agreed that violence against Americans, these are people that are here, by the way. 25, not 1%. By the way, 1% is unacceptable. 25% of those polled agreed that violence against Americans here in the United States is justified as part of the global jihad. They want to change your religion. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. Not going to happen. 51% want to be governed according to Sharia. You know what Sharia is? Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice.
On Sunday, Americans woke up to a nightmare that's become mind-numbingly familiar. Another act of terrorism in a place no one expected. A madman filled with hate, with guns in his hands, and apparently consumed by rage against LGBT Americans. We know that he pledged allegiance to ISIS, that they are now taking credit. But there's a lot we still don't know, including what other mix of motives drove him to kill.
A radical Islamic terrorist targeted the nightclub, not only because he wanted to kill Americans, but in order to execute gay and lesbian citizens because of their sexual orientation. It's a strike at the heart and soul of who we are as a nation. It's an assault on the ability of free people to live their lives, love who they want, and express their identity. It's an attack on the right of every single American to live in peace and safety in their own country.
Islam is not our adversary. Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism.
Do you agree with that characterization, radical Islam?
I don't think we're at war with Islam. I don't think we're at war with all Muslims. I think we're at war with jihadists. We've got to reach out to Muslim countries. We've got to have them be part of our coalition.
If we want to protect the quality of life for all Americans, women and children, gay and straight, Jews and Christians, and all people, then we need to tell the truth about radical Islam, and we need to do it now. We need to tell the truth also about how radical Islam is coming to our shores. Many of the principles of radical Islam are incompatible with Western values and institutions. Is anti-woman, anti-gay, and anti-American. I refuse to allow America to become a place where gay people, Christian people, Jewish people are targets of persecution and intimidation by radical Islamic preachers of hate and violence. They enslave women and they murder gays. I don't want them in our country.